So hey Dan, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, Anish?
Yeah, I'm good too. And how is the situation there now?
We've just gone into tier 4, so I guess it's a good time to be doing things virtually.
I mean, I know you personally. So for my subscribers and audience who is watching this podcast, I just want to know more about yourself. So just a casual intro of who are you and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Daniel Miller. I am a compositor primarily, and I'm also making a short film, which I'm doing everything as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
I've been compositing for about almost a decade, I think. I started also quite late. I started when I was like 30, when I actually started compositing. Before that, I'd done like a general filmmaking media studies degree. And I did a bit of everything. I done my short film. So I'd done all the different roles even but on sort of indie, no budget, and then had done other jobs at the time and really focused on a proper career path within VFX when I was almost 30. So, and now I'm 43. So, and also I've been I did a course for Pluralsight using V-Ray, which was based on Composition 2, and the short film that we're working on, we're going to be using V-Ray, and we're going to be producing some tutorial content based around the short film as well further down the line. And that's it.
Now situation is a bit crazy and a lot of things are happening in the industry. So what's the future of visual effects and animation industry in simple terms? I mean, it can be your imagination or your ideas of future.
So I mean, I'm sure there are people with much more involved in making the decisions and much smarter than me that are actually deciding some of this stuff. But you can see things that are just obvious. They're really apparent. The real-time stuff. I mean, Unreal Engine is going to be important to a lot of things, and I think that's going to have. I think it's also trying to integrate that with some traditional things, because the tendency in the industry, as long as I've been working, is to allow the client to defer making a decision later and later in the process. If you did an explosion, a practical explosion, that was it. What you filmed and what you had in the camera was what was there. I mean, if you actually watch the old Duel, there are shots. There's a shot with a reflection of Steven Spielberg, and that's in the film. Nowadays, that would go to prep, that would get painted out. So there's an element of clients have been getting used to make the decision later and later. The software has been allowing that, and Baselight for grading can do amazing. I've seen DI ops and colorists do VFX like paint out. So it's not even when you get to the last minute and they're like, oh, but there's a booming shot. They don't even need to go back to comp or to external vendor for prep. They can sometimes, if it's simple, they can do it in the grade. So I think the clients have been getting a little bit spoiled in that sense. Now, the advantage of real time is I think it can be fantastic. Obviously, you've got the limits of
physicality
of the actual screens themselves, which are going to get better because you've got lag and things like that. But also, your render can only be as good as Unreal can render in real time. You can't up the settings and have it slow down, because if it slows down, you can't use it. But on the other hand, so I think that's going to be important, but on the other hand, that also means you have to change your mentality. You have to prepare everything in advance. You've made your decisions beforehand. I think there's a bit of, I know that on the Mandalorian they had some green screen, sometimes sections were green screen. I think there's been some discussion of like having the screens run at a higher frame rate, so every other frame is green. It's dangerous, because then you do all the work beforehand, you do all the stuff, and then they still change their mind and you end up doing a green screen key. But that idea of alternating frames, that comes from stop motion animation. That's how they keep stop motion stuff. They have two lighting setups. Anyway, so I think but what I think is interesting is that mentality might filter down into the line. If you think of like TV dramas and things, I mean, I've done so many screen inserts on phones and computer screens, where you're just compositing a background. Why is that? That's because they haven't been able to make a decision. I mean, obviously, if it's a spaceship HUD or something that doesn't exist, and it's kind of imposed. But if it's an iPhone, there's really no reason you couldn't decide the graphics beforehand and have it in the phone when you're on set, and you'd get all the advantages that they have, when they do The Mandalorian, but obviously for much smaller production, for much smaller things. I mean, screen comps aren't expensive. They're like they're usually like 20-minute, 2-hour shots. They're not, they're things that you bang out loads of them. But I mean, they can also become really hard when people are doing crazy things. I've seen people, like a police interrogation, and they're whacking the iPad out of the person's hand, and then you're trying to track that. It's madness. So, so you can think of situations where they could actually. But the thing about screen comps is there are a lot of them. Often hundreds in a show, hundreds and hundreds. So even if they're only 2-hour shots, you might have 400 shots. Well, do you need them? Could you not do it all before? So I think sometimes once they start thinking about what can they, having to prepare things beforehand, that might change things that even don't use this technique. Even if they're not using Unreal Engine, they're not using LED screens. If they're starting to think, let's plan all the graphics beforehand, then that might filter down to all kinds of production. Who knows?
Yeah, lots of things might happen in 2021. Yeah.
And I think we're going to still be working from home. I mean, it's going to be an option. I mean, people will go into the studio, but you don't have to.
Hybrid,
and that's a big thing. And I think ultimately that's a positive thing. I mean, it's for juniors, I think it's great to be in a room with experienced artists around. I think it's very important. But I think you need to be in the office every day. And even forget about COVID, even just like with colds and flus, every time I've been in the winter in a studio this time of year, it's just a room full of people drinking Lemsip and coughing and sneezing. Like at least even if it's just you come in the office most days, but even if you have a cold, you just work from home. You don't have to take a sick day. You still do your job. You still deliver your shots.
I have went through your LinkedIn profile and you were an instructor for Pluralsight. So what is your good and bad experiences teaching visual effects online?
Okay, so I only did the one. I mean, I actually only did the one course professionally, and I also do some mentoring for I think Prospero, which you did as well. It's a bit more informal, and I've got some things on my blog of just setups and things like that. The course for Pluralsight was interesting because it was in V-Ray, so they actually I proposed to do a course in Nuke, and they were already fully booked for Nuke courses. And so actually, V-Ray, which was like my secondary skill of doing 3D, where I'm weaker, I had to, because you have to learn to do any kind of teaching content. And the other thing is in production, sometimes it's just enough to get you over the line. You work out, even if it's not the right way of doing it, if it works and it looks good in the shot, then it goes out the door. But if you're going to teach people a certain approach, it needs to be actually the correct approach, the most efficient. And so, I did a lesson on that, which is about troubleshooting your renders and the things that come up and how to spot why your beauty passes aren't adding up to the correct result. And that was actually quite hard because I didn't really know. When I started doing it, I was like, oh. And then I honestly spent days like actually re-rendering, going, okay, so that's why. And so, that was one aspect. The only other, everything else was positive. I learned a lot. I got paid a fee up front. You get a small fee, sort of monthly, which is a great thing about these sort of professional courses. But the only downside is that obviously being for a specific software and a specific version, there's a reality that it's going to go out of date. There are other ththings you could teach like drawing where your course could be up to date forever. But whereas obviously if you do Nuke version 12, great, and then 2 years down the line it's Nuke version 15, and most of it's going to be relevant. I mean, most of the time the techniques are the techniques, but every now and again things change completely. So I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I bought a nice microphone, which has actually been really useful in lockdown because now I have, I mean, it also clarifies your ideas because you have to think about, well, why do I do it that way? Because you do, sometimes it's just because when you were a junior, the person that you looked up to that was more senior said, this is the way to do it. And it might even be wrong. People they're not gods. So sometimes, I remember even the EXR settings. I remember we had a supervisor, one of the first places I worked, and he said, zip 16, everything set to zip 16. And it's a bigger number than one. Zip 1, Zip 16. I thought Zip 16 was higher quality. So even later on, as a lead, I started implementing that we would do Zip 16. And then I sat and read, must have been really bored, but I sat and read the ILM OpenEXR document, or the entire document, to just see what were the best settings. And then it was like, no, Zip 1 it's because it's by every line, and Zip 16 is just every 16 lines. So it's a lower quality. And when I realized that, I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I've been, lowering the quality of all these renders. Yeah. Sometimes it's very important to, even if you think you know something, just check, just like actually read the documentation, because you hear things, people tell you things, like even people, like you see artists doing things like plussing alphas together. You're like, plus alphas, like, I mean, there's just stuff that you do need to just check sometimes. And
that's awesome.
Plus a load of alphas and then clamp them. It's like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
So check the right way to do things. Even if you think, even if, a supervisor, an old lead told you to do it years ago, things change. The right way to do things changes as well.
Even when I started YouTubing, when I started making tutorials, I used to get a lot of feedbacks from a lot of experienced professionals. So I used to think first, like, why I'm getting all these feedbacks? I'm just sharing my thoughts on this video. But then later I thought, like, okay, I should treat these feedbacks as very constructive one, and I took that, and then I decided, okay, we should not make content like for the sake of making content. We should explore, and that if you are well sure of that idea, that it is working, then make video on that, make tutorial on that, or else don't try that. So
I think you're open if you declare, I don't know, I've just started learning, this is what I think to do, then you're inviting feedback. That's different from a tutorial, right? I think that kind of vlogging your learning process can be valuable too.
Yeah, that's
YouTube. You are like, this is how I'm doing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
a cleanup shot in Nuke. Yeah. I don't know if it's the right way to do it, and then
before YouTubing was not like this much busy, and nowadays there are a lot of tutorials, a lot of stuff is coming up in YouTube. So now everyone has their own profiles in YouTube, and everyone is making videos on their ideas and or how they are doing a shot, or it's going on. So we should understand what is the best, and we should not judge this is wrong. For compositing, there is not like this is only method. There are thousands of methods for doing one single work. So we met each other in Prospella, and so can you tell us more about Prospella and how it can be useful for young generation all around the world?
So I'm not sure even how I found out about Prospella. I think it was an advert on LinkedIn or something like that.
Yeah, maybe Access VFX podcast.
Yeah, and so the idea is you're mentoring someone that wants to work in the industry. They could be someone that's maybe studying at university, someone that's not in a traditional background. I mean, one thing is also people that might traditionally not be in VFX, that they're underrepresented, people from working class backgrounds, people from ethnic minorities, at least in Britain. There are less women and so on. And so, to try and help those people break into the industry, because it's a bit of when you're outside, it's a bit of a box. You don't know how it works, and your role is not to be the master of VFX. Your role is, I'm a working artist. I'm doing this job that you would like to be doing, and or similar to what you would like to be doing, that works with people that do what you want to be doing. So, for example, as a compositor, I could mentor potentially a lighter. I'm not a lighter, but they know. I know what lighters do, and I talk to lighters every day. So, that could work. So the idea is you're giving them advice on the way to approach looking for work, applying for work. They can send you show reels. You do a show reel. If you send it for a job application, if they don't like it, that's it. You just don't hear anything from them. So as a mentor, what you can do is they can send you their reel or a shot that they want to put in their reel, and you can say, well, tell them to perhaps change some things, maybe take a shot out, put another shot in, and things like that, or even their letters that they're writing. So, and sometimes it can just be a chat. I mean, we've obviously with everyone, with the coronavirus people, not hiring for a while, and they were getting stressed and worried, and you can just say, hey, I mean, it's unprecedented, so I don't really know what advice to give, but it's just the reassurance that there's someone else there that cares about what's going on in your life. So, and that's largely it's quite rewarding because their questions, I think it's the same as was the same in the tutorials. Whenever you try and explain something to someone else, you learn. And the more junior the person, the more you have to break it down, the more you actually learn. Because if they ask you a difficult question and you have to think about it, then maybe you even have to ask your colleagues or supervisor if you can't answer it directly. And then in that situation, you've suddenly been inspired to gain some new knowledge that you otherwise wouldn't have acquired.
Awesome. Yeah. And Prospella actually is very useful for mentors and mentee also.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the mentees, I think I would have loved to have had something similar when I was starting. There were VFX forums. There was one which it closed down before I started, but I remember a few really senior artists took the time to write me a guide to what I was doing, because I had obviously an unusual background of, I'd done a bit of everything within sort of film with my own short films and things, but had no professional experience really, and no skills that were at a professional level, and I was just starting. So I was a beginner, but also in this funny position. So they were able to give me advice that was really solid and concrete based on their experience. So
I know Python is a useful or handy thing for a compositor. So what all are the ways one compositor can use Python knowledge in his work?
Okay, so it does depend on the kind of facility you're in. In a bigger facility, obviously a lot of scripting is already done. Still, there are things you can set up. I mean, a simple Python loop. If you just want to, for example, you bring in at one of us, they use ACES color space. A lot of things they come in with default color space, like a QuickTime reference QuickTime, and the default color space errors out. And if you've got a bunch of QuickTimes, you want to just look at them in RAW, you can just use a simple Python loop and even set that to a hotkey, and bam, they're all raw and they all read correctly. So something that could be annoying, that you have to open all these read nodes and click all these checkboxes, actually becomes one step. So you can set up really simple loops that do very quick things, or set the B box to B, because your bounding boxes can get bigger and bigger and bigger. So lots of things you can set up, or even just having a hotkey for the unpremult, premult nodes. How many unpremult and premult nodes? And tab. At the moment, I always have it. So U makes an unpremult, and Control U makes a premult, for example. And then you can do U color grade, U G U Control U, and you've got unpremult, grades, and premult. So in 3 buttons. So it can be handy for that way. If you're in a small facility, you don't have a pipeline, then you can do deeper, cooler things. I mean, at Molinaire, they didn't really have any kind of pipeline. I had to do a lot of the pipeline stuff myself. So it's things like creating the right nodes that automatically name things correctly. So the naming was consistent. You could even adapt that. Sometimes from the client, you'd get client specifications. So some clients, for example, they would, in the version number, they'd have a number that was the vendor. So our vendor, we were vendor number 5. So instead of V001, it might be V5001, because we're vendor 5001. So examples like that, you could script, and then all the artists using it would do it. It could make a QuickTime with burn-ins, with the bringing in the LUT from DI. So it could do all of that stuff, and that could all be done, that could all be scripted in Python. And so it becomes very easy to make version zeros, lots of really annoying, tedious tasks that you can just avoid. Essentially, and a lot of things error when you type that. I mean, if you just use Nuke out of the box with no scripting, it's kind of awful to make a write node. You have to type it in, and then remember to switch on to make folders, and type the name and type the frame padding and all of that. And if you make one typo in any of that, you know, your file is going to have some ridiculous name. So, or be in completely the wrong folder.
Yeah.
So that stuff is really handy for that kind of facility. Like I said, a bigger facility, you don't need that.
Yeah.
But there's things you can do even in a bigger place. Some really big corporate things, they won't let you actually do that unless you're a lead or a supervisor. But even then, you can propose something to a lead or a supervisor.
Now, I mean, I have some technical questions to ask you. So, I mean, what are some of your favorite gizmos inside Nuke?
Okay, so it's actually a plugin, but probably the effect is reduce noise.
Yeah.
The Nuke video, because I mean it's amazing, and when you compare it to Nuke's denoise, I mean I know they've improved it and they were trying to make it on par with Nuke, but Nuke video just blows it out of the water. It is amazing, and it is so handy that you can accurately get rid of grain and keep so much detail. Especially if you really want to, you can go in the settings. But even the default is amazing, and you can go in there and actually make it better if you want to.
No tool can beat reduce noise, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, Nuke video, is brilliant. I mean, you can do things to make it better. Like you can go back into the original color space of the camera, for example, and it generally gives you a better result. Or at least if you go back to the primaries of the camera, it gives you a better result, and then come back. But that's great. There's another one also about grain, which was actually a gizmo, DAS grain.
Fabian.
Which is it'll analyze the grain and then do that. I've looked at different ways of doing grain. I built a gizmo based on workflow of a supervisor. I've forgotten the name, but I did credit him in the gizmo called comparative grain, which is just the idea of you from your degrained plate from the original plate, and you get the grain, and then you plus it back in, and so that gives you the original grain. But if you're doing paint outs or cleanup, you actually sometimes get the high contrast areas coming back with the grain, which is problematic. So there's all these techniques which most facilities have some version of, where you essentially have a difference map between the denoise plate and the denoise comp, and then in that difference you use some kind of artificial grain, and then in the areas that are unchanged, you just use the plus back the original grain within some kind of tolerance. So DAS grain is kind of a step up from that, because it can also take the grain and use a Roto noise pattern to scatter it about, and you can also combine that with the other workflows. So that's brilliant. There's a little script called corner pin to matrix, which I think is great. If you bring in a track from Mocha, and you've got corner pin, then you can actually export the data as matrix data, so you can put the data directly into a Roto paint node, or Roto node, a spline warp node, a grid warp node, and then it has the corner pin data in it. So if you're rotoing something, it will follow the corner pin track without having another node on it, and with a warp as well. So you could have someone's head turning, and the grid warp will track to the side, and you can then have an adjustment that actually works as they turn. So that's amazing. More specific, again, like plugin, but the face builder, face tracker thing, that's brilliant. I mean, there's really this magic. You can make a head, and you can make a sleepy head and track it in like really easily. So that's a nice one.
Any other tools?
Those are the ones that spring to mind as the coolest ones.
You can send me some list if you have, so I'll add those in my description. I mean, in the video description, so that people can go over there and check it. If you have
it's a simple one, but it's really, really useful. It's just edge roughen. It's really basic. It's like a fractal, or there are lots of variants of this idea of like a fractal blur or something similar. And just if you're putting in a patch, sometimes you don't even a soft matte isn't going to work. What you want is some kind of jagged edge patch. The only disadvantage is it works with a patch that's tracked on, but because the noise pattern is static, you can't use it for a roto. So if you're rotoing a bear, you can't. The noise won't stick to your roto as it animates. So it's for patches, not for roto, but it's actually really handy, and you can easily jump inside it, change it from just being alpha to being RGB, and use it just to like mess up something that's too neat and tidy. So that's a good one.
Well.
Oh, And I tell you, really, there's a one by Richard Fraser. Richard Fraser is a supervisor, I think at Blue Bolt or something like that. But anyway, it doesn't matter. He might have moved on. Who knows? But this is essentially rebuild frames. So it will. What it uses is an upflow. It just uses a script. So it will. If you've got a bad frame, for example, it's damaged in the camera.
Okay.
This is its original purpose. It will use a time warp, make an expression. You select which frames are bad, and then it will use an optical flow to try and invent a new frame. So it's using the retime technology. And I've used that. I've actually modified it a little bit so that there's also the option of using a Chronos, because obviously Chronos is better quality. But apart from what it's originally designed for, you can also use it sometimes as a kind of quick morph or something between two patches or all kinds of things. You can use it to just fill a gap of one frame. So, or to transition from one thing to another. So it can be really, really, really handy. Or even just a bad frame of CG sometimes. I mean, at least for a temp, you can get you a version that can be shown as a work in progress, and then, CG can sort out the problem for the final.
Yeah. So, my next question is, if you're getting a green screen footage or a blue screen footage, which is your favorite method in Nuke or in any other software for keying that footage?
Yeah, so the first thing with any kind of green screen, blue screen is divide and conquer, right? You look at the different areas. For example, some areas often are brighter, some areas are darker of the screen because it's not lit perfectly. Some areas have creasing. And the subject as well can be darker and lighter. For example, here I've got this black hoodie. You could probably Luma key that, right? And then obviously my bald head has got a big reflection on it. That would probably, if it was a green screen behind me, that would probably be a big green reflection. And so you would probably have to rotate, like a bald head, I would probably rotate it, right? And then in your case, you've got obviously some stray hairs, so you've got hair detail, but your hair is dark, so it's probably fairly easy. Probably going to be fairly easy unless there's a dark shadow, a dark crease in the green screen. And then you firstly divide it up and think about the different areas, and then it's usually some combination of there'll be an edge key, which will probably be a key light or IBK, and then a core key, which would be prime out or something. Or if I've got Roto, I'll use the Roto, or some combination of the two. And then I would also probably use, for some extra kind of hair detail stuff, like something like an additive key, which could just be something you just build yourself without using any gizmos. You could just simply take the green and make it black. You grade it to be black, and then you can just plus that onto the background. Or you can make it white, clamp it to white, and multiply that to get the dark areas.
So you do additive keying manually, or is there any gizmo for that?
I would normally just build it manually, because even with a plus, if you don't clamp the blacks, that will give you dark detail too. But there are some gizmos that make it easier, like there's a hair key gizmo, and these can be quite useful for giving you extra, because they do a few clever tricks as well. But I think there's something that I think you should always learn how to build the thing yourself, because there's sometimes the gizmos, because you don't know all the nodes that are inside and everything that they're doing. When you have a problem, when it doesn't work, you don't know why. When you do it yourself, you've worked out, okay, and it's much easier to solve the issues. And so the idea is that you do the additive key onto the background, and then you put your standard key usually on top, essentially. And that's kind of, and it's some process of that, and then you just sort of battle through it and all the rest of it until it's done.
Yeah, got it. So do you prefer to do roto paint for your own comp shots, or is it like a tedious task for you?
I think, it can be tedious. I don't think it's, first thing I'd say, it's not a junior job because it's easy. It's a junior job because no one wants to do it. So, paint out, clean up shots can be the hardest shots, harder than a lot of compositing shots, without a doubt. The one advantage you have over comp shots is it's a very clear target. Whereas with a comp shot, the brief could change. If they said remove this microphone, you remove the microphone, there's all the problems of getting the plant back, but that's the goal, that's it. And then the worst they can say is add more things, like get rid of that security alarm at the back or whatever. But Whereas with a comp, it could be you put in a castle and then they want a different castle, or you put in a CG dragon and then they change the color of the dragon and everything changes, or the animation changes, or you have blue fire becomes red fire, or vice versa. So there are all sorts of creative changes that can happen in comp. Going back to whether I prefer to do my own cleanup, it depends how much is a simple answer. If it's quick and easy, I would rather do it myself, because if it's something I can do in like an hour or in 2 hours, I would probably rather do it myself. I mean, the company might actually prefer to give it to prep, because that might be how the resources are, and it's probably expensive to get me to do the prep and roto. But if I can do the roto in like half an hour or less, or because at the end of the day, if I want roto, I have to create a brief to give to my supervisor, and that has to go then to the department. So I'll probably make a still and flag, like, circle around the things that need to be cleaned up, what needs to be roto. You have to write a brief. Sometimes roto, you don't always want it on the same level. There might be a reason why I might need separate roto for, my hood and my head, for example. And that might not come through to the roto department. And you get the roto, you've got the roto for me that's perfect, but there's no separation between my neck and the hood. And if I need to put something between them, I can't, or I still have to do roto myself. So if I can do it in a short amount of time, I would rather do it myself. Now, I'll be honest, I don't want to spend like a whole day rotoing or a whole day doing paint out. Actually, I don't find roto tedious, weirdly, because I find it kind of relaxing. You don't have to think very much. I mean, I can put on a podcast. I can have like a deep chat with my colleagues if I'm talking. Whereas if I'm compositing, you can't really have you can have dumb sort of banter, but you can't really have like a really deep conversation, because you need to concentrate on what you're actually doing. Roto, you don't really need to think about very much. So if you're doing roto, cleanup is a bit of both, because when you're actually painting, again, it's more like almost meditative, just paint. When you actually start constructing how the cleanup shot is going to work, that's you have to really think about that. It's like a puzzle.
Parallax and all, projection and all.
But I find there is something about, if you have a bit of time to, because I don't like to not be working. If I'm at work, then I want to do my job, finish it, and then stop. I don't like to work like stupid hours. I know it's quite common in the industry, but I try and keep it to as normal hours as possible. I like to be working when I'm at work. But if I'm rotoing, I can actually, still, listen to a podcast that's interesting, learn something new, and just roto, and you don't really have to think. Once you've done enough roto, which I'm sure you have, and I'm sure all of us have, you don't need to think really. You just like boom, 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 and do it. And so, the process of actually requesting. Having said that, I've had some shots where the cleanup was insane. I did a shot in Pinocchio where, which you'll see on one of us is it will be on my next show, but not this. But the rig was, he had a big helmet and then a big metal nose, and it's all in front of his face. And the comp was interesting because there's lots of CG, but the cleanup, I've got to say, the person who did the cleanup, and I don't know who the artist was, but if you're watching this, then you're amazing. And I was really amazingly impressed by that work, because I know it's a nightmare when you've got something in front of the main actor's face and clothing that's moving and folding and all of that stuff. So, having said that, it's actually quite nice to have someone else do that.
Lots of patience.
I mean, I wouldn't have minded. Actually, I wouldn't have minded doing it if I'd been assigned the time to do it, but I'm sure it was quite a lot of time. It was
so the reason why I asked this question is I was a roto paint artist for almost 7 years, and then I moved into comp. So when I was doing compositing, my knowledge in roto paint really helped me. And one more thing I would like to know is you prefer to do roto in Nuke, or you do roto in Mocha or Silhouette? So
I actually never use Silhouette, so I don't know how to use Silhouette, and I probably never will at this point. I use Mocha a lot, but normally I do the track in Mocha, and then using something like the corner pincer matrix, and then it's all the advantages of rotoing in Mocha, because you have the actual corner pin data within the roto, and so you get that efficiency that you would have if you did it in Mocha. And that's just because sometimes, I guess when you're as a compositor doing Roto, you have the advantage over a Roto artist in that you know exactly what you need, how accurate it needs to be, how soft the edge needs to be, and so on, which the Roto artist just kind of has to kind of go for worst case scenario. So that's another thing that if you're doing Roto or paint for a compositor, you end up doing more work than if you're doing it for yourself. Because as a compositor, what you try and do is you try and do the minimum amount of paint out, the minimum amount of Roto that you can. So I tend to do it in Nuke because I can immediately see, okay, I need a bit more, I need a bit more, I don't need any more, I can stop. And, you know, so, and I've been using Nuke for a long time. So
Got it. So, and one more question is like, which is your favorite tracking option or tracking method or tracking software, and why?
Okay. So as a compositor, my favorite is actually Mocha because I'm usually I try and, I mean, it might be that I receive match move and then it's just use the match move data. And if I'm at a smaller place where you have to do it yourself, then my approach would be to use the simplest approach and then escalate as you need to. So if you can get away with a 1-point tracker, use a 1-point tracker. Mocha is like such a standard. I would use it all the time. Blah, 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 blah. And then you might think about, well, actually, you know, you might need to camera track. And sometimes you should know once you've got which one you need to go for any given shot. But I would probably, if I had to then do a camera track, I would probably use PF Track because I know it as the only software apart from Nuke. But I know, you know, Match Movers use 3D. But I thought that 3D is really for like your Match Mover and that's your job because it's quite a beast to learn. So I'd probably just use the Nuke X camera tracker. But mostly for most of the tracking I do as a compositor, it's probably going to be Mocha. Although I use the smart fixes a lot. Since smart fixes have come into Nuke, I've used them all over the place. Because the smart fixes, I think, have been a fantastic addition. I mean, I use them sort of all the time for all kinds of things. I mean, they'll have limitations, like they don't deal with occlusions very well. But they're still really for things like, you know, stuff in people's jackets. I mean, I'm interested now that new mod's got some bendy stuff, which I've not played with.
You heard about the new update in Mocha Pro 2021, the power mesh option?
Yeah, that looks really impressive. I haven't touched it. I saw your video on it, which actually, you know,
I tried it and it's really working well.
Other thing I'd say about tracking, it's really good to learn to use ST maps, because once you can understand ST maps, you can, for example, if you're using smart vectors and smart vectors work for most of your shot, but for section they don't work, you can actually key mix two ST maps. So you've got, you know, smart vectors for the bit that uses smart vectors, and then you might have even a Mocha track or a 1-point tracker, but you can combine them with a ST map. And speaking of that, the favorite gizmos, jumping back to favorite gizmos, but my absolute favorite gizmo at the moment is a thing that my supervisor on Godmother showed me, which is called eye transform.
Eye transform,
and it is so good. Like it's basically like a eye display. So not eye transform. Eye transform is the node in Nuke, which I never use. I use a QMix, but eye displays is basically a similar idea to the eye transform, or if you have a QMix with a transform in it. But it uses displacement. So, you know, sometimes if you've got CG and the holdouts aren't quite correct, you just need to push the CG a few pixels towards the edge. And you can do that in a very seamless way because you can be quite subtle with it. You can just sort of move things a little bit. And so it's like a godsend. Honestly, it saved me so much time. I mean, you can do this with spline warps and grooves, but they're so much heavier. You know, you get crashes. This is like as fast as using a transform, but you've got all that. You know, you can do distortion. So I think eye displace is my favorite gizmo of all time.
Thank you for sharing that. So if I just want to learn Python, for learning Python basics, where should I start first?
So I would start with something called Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. Let me just find the author actually give me 1 second.
Yeah, you can share me the link of that and I will add that in the description so anyone can find.
I would say Automate the Boring Stuff with Python, which there's a website with most of the chapters for free. There's a Udemy course which is pretty cheap and often free. It's Ali Sweetgart, I think is his name. Al Sweetgart, and I'm just getting his name wrong, so I'm not going to say his name. Delete the bit where I say his name. Just automate the boring stuff with Python. I would start with automate the boring stuff with Python, which has a free online ebook. It has an ebook you can purchase, and it has an Udemy course, video course you can purchase, depending on which is probably a bit more helpful if you're a complete beginner. But this is just about Python in general.
Yeah,
I find if you learn Python itself, then you can just look at the manual for actually how to apply Python within Nuke and just find the things that you want to do within Nuke itself. And also, when you download scripts, or if you're using scripts that you've downloaded from other people, you can just have a look at them and read them and like learn. You know, for example, try and copy them and change the bits that you don't like. So that's one way. Look at the really important scripts. There are some more specific to Nuke. Victor Perez has one on FX PhD. Ben McEwen,
Python for
has one, which I haven't done. But I did do Ben McEwen's Git course. And
the
Git,
second one.
If you already know Python to a certain level, Git is actually very handy. It's a versioning tool. And so it's very important. If you're building something bigger, then it's actually really, really useful. It's also a good way to keep all of your .nuke organized, and if you make changes and you break something, you can roll back very easily. So that's really handy to know. So that's kind of it. And the reason I would say learn Python outside of Nuke is that if you then want to use Python within another software, for example, Houdini or Blender or Maya, or just within a pipeline itself, then you can do that also. Something really basic. I mean, a really basic Python script that I use all the time is just to delete empty folders. Because you often want to have a folder structure that's very organized with a place for everything. But when you archive a project, it can be annoying to look through all these empty folders within an old project, and maybe you only because you made a 3D folder for every shot, but you don't have 3D in every shot. So if when you finish the project, before you archive it, you run this script, delete the empty folders, and you know that every folder you look in will have a file in it. It might not be the file you want, but you're not wasting time looking at empty folders, which is actually kind of handy. So that's an example. It's useful to know Python outside of Nuke, not just within Nuke.
Got it. I mean, if you could share that link of those courses and those PDFs, I will add that in the description, and it will be useful for the people who are watching this podcast. So so my next question is like it's about the system configuration and the requirements. And so if I want to get into animation and visual effects industry, I definitely need to purchase a machine for me so that I can practice, I can learn things over there. So can you give some insights about like what machine configuration we need to buy?
I thought a lot about this question when I was sent it, because I don't want to say something that's going to go out of date very quickly and say specifically buy this graphics card and buy this. So I would say the first thing, if you're not learning and you're doing it purely for work, then you might want to think about, do I need a workstation that does all the machine? Because, for example, a lot of us are working from home, but very often we're using a VPN connection to work, and using the workstation in the office to do all the actual that's running Nuke or Maya or Houdini or whatever. In that situation, then most of your money that you're going to spend on your home setup should be about your internet connection, your router, your having a good Wacom if you can't borrow one from your employer, having a good monitor, and having a nice, comfortable keyboard, a nice desk. Microphone, which, by the way, you've seen the microphone in the shot. I've not been using that microphone the whole time because Windows updates are awful. Every time it updates, it stops USB microphones from working. I don't know why. But I would say that if you don't need the machine itself to be powerful, don't spend the money there. Spend it on making your space nicer. But if you're doing projects, if you're actually working on the machine, whether it's personal projects or you're learning, then I would start with the system requirements for the software you're using, right? So go on to the Foundry website, look at what it asks for, and then look at the way to build a machine. I mean, the advantage of using, if you're not moving around too much, then probably a workstation is better because you get more bang for your buck, you get more power for your money, and it's easier to add things. If you can't afford the best graphics card, you can add it later, you can add more RAM later. Yeah. If you buy a Mac, they are great in that they're very easy to configure, very easy to work with. But if you then need a more powerful Mac, you need to buy a new Mac. You can't add to it, which can be frustrating. But also find out if the software supports the advantages of that new thing. For example, the new M1 Macs are really interesting because they're really fast. But at the moment, I don't know if that's even supported within Nuke. So, and again, there's the problem, it's all proprietary. There are sort of trial and true things. Definitely, I would look at, for Nuke, having a lot of RAM, especially, and also think about your job. So if your job is Roto, then you are probably, and you're using Silhouette on you probably want a lot of RAM because you want to cache a lot of footage back and forth. You want a reasonably fast processor. Yeah. You might not be using the graphics card for Nuke. I think you do use GPU acceleration in Mocha and possibly in Silhouette. So then you start to think about having a decent graphics card. If you're doing 3D, if you're lighter, then you want to think about like the RTX cards because you want to think about like having real-time ray tracing and those things, which are really, really powerful workflows. So I think you just need to stop and think about what software you're using, what job you're doing, and be very targeted, because you could spend a lot of money on a computer, and you want to spend enough money that you can make that money back. For learning, any gaming computer is good enough. But if you can play games on it, then you can learn all the software on it. And I wouldn't go more than that. I just buy like a mid-range, even a low-end gaming machine for learning. Because actually, not having the best machine is good for learning as well. Because one thing, when you have the really powerful machine in your office, you'll be given 4K footage or 6K footage, or you'll be asked to do things super fast. And your machine will never be powerful enough. So it's good to get used from the beginning to having a machine that's not powerful enough. If you buy the high-end machine, you're used to having you can get some really bad habits. You can not be pre-rendering, having loads of heavy nodes in a row, because it doesn't matter, because you're on your little tutorial footage, it's fine. But the moment that you then go into a professional environment, you're going to have your neat video active, followed by a lens distortion and a bunch of warp nodes and some overflow, and then the machine is going to fall over the 4K footage. So having this idea of having the most basic machine possible, and then you have to, as soon as you put in a heavy node, you have to think about, you learn quickly which nodes are heavy, and that's important to know actually in Nuke.
Awesome. Yeah. So almost more than 1 hour we are speaking, and now final 2 questions is like a few tips for artists for making their life to ease.
So to make your life easier as an artist, I would say from the bat is just make sure that you're doing the right thing. Like, check the brief, because the easiest way you can make your life difficult is to do a lot of work that isn't what you were asked to do. So, if you're given, and one way also is to compare the tasks you're given to the time that you're assigned to do it. So if you're asked to do some cleanup and you're given 2 hours and you think, well, there's no way I could do that in 2 hours. Well, just check that that is what they've requested that you do, because it might be that you're trying to, you're thinking that you need to paint out more things than you need to do. And it might be that what you actually need to do is much simpler, and it can be done within 2 hours. If it can't, there might be another reason for that. It might be underbid because very often the shots are bid on a kind of average. So if you've got assigned time, you want to stick to that on average. But I wouldn't. It's not necessarily wrong that one particular shot will take longer than the assigned time. But generally speaking, if all of your shots take longer than the assigned time, then you have a problem. On average, you should be, like, for those shots that take longer, there should be shots that take less time. than was bid. So you want to be around that time. And the second thing is try and maintain your concentration. And so if you've got 4 shots and you're assigned one day to do 4 shots, then that means you've got 2 hours for each shot to do an 8-hour day. Try and think about having like a normal office hour work day and try and think how you can do your work within that day. Sometimes you can't. You may be right at the end of a project and you will work late, but don't make that the standard way of working. And definitely if you're staying 12, 14 hours, but you're, a lot of that time you're browsing on the internet, why are you doing that? Like get your work done and then go.
Yeah.
And take your breaks away from your desk if you can. And the other thing is just like labeling, naming, get that stuff right. Like labeling, naming, because, you may come back to that script later and you might have forgotten everything. You may be asked to make a change, a creative change later that you need to find out. Think about what change, try and think about what changes you might be asked to give and give yourself the controls, build yourself the controls to do that, even if it takes a little bit longer, like put in that control. So if they want to change the color of the dragon, they can. Quick things to scale something up or down without breaking the animation. So don't have one transform that scales it and one that animates it. Have one that does the scaling that's upstream of the animation, so that the animation won't break if they say, can you make that a little bit smaller? Whereas if you put them in one node, you're kind of like you're screwed. So try and preempt what briefs you get and communicate with people. Like talk to people. If the task is you can't do it in the time that they're expecting you to do it, or you can't do it at all, or the network is down and you can't work, let someone know, and don't let them know. Like the time not to let them know is just before delivery or just before dailies or just before client review. Those are not the times to let them know. You let them know as soon as the shot lands on your desk, as soon as the problem occurs. As soon as you've spent like 10, 15 minutes on a shot, you should start to get an idea if you're going to have problems. You just think, oh my God, this shot, if you put something into Mocha that you expect to track in 5 minutes and you find that it does not track, and sometimes there are shots that are hard to track, but sometimes there are shots that are hard to track for no apparent reason, like you and
we will think like this is the easiest shot, but it will not give that result. It happens.
And if you see that, then you just need to let someone know. It might be something weird in the compression, or some weird artifact that's causing these issues, and maybe there's a solution somewhere else. So and sometimes you just like another artist has a different way of doing things that might in this approach be better. Like normally Mocha is way better than the Nuke's planar tracker. It's like but in 1 or 2 shots it's the other way around. It just is. I don't know why. So so just try different things, but really make sure people know there's one. Those are the main things. Communication is key. Do the job that you're asked to do. Try and do it in the time that you're given, and make sure that you are able to change things. And the second thing is a certain bit of detachment. It is art, but it's not your art. You're working for the artist who's the director or the client, and they. If they do something that you don't like, you can't go, oh no, but that's rubbish, I'm not doing that. You have to do it. You have to be detached from the work enough. Don't be obsessed, because you might be part of great art, but you're not Leonardo da Vinci. You might be the guy in Leonardo da Vinci's studio who's painting the tree in the background of the great painting, but you're not the main artist. So you have to just like have the pride in your work to do good quality work, but also the detachment that if the client makes a decision that you hate, you think it's going to look awful, well, you don't put it in your show reel, but that's the end of it. Just do it. It is a job, and you need to remember that it's a job.
So we have came up to the final question, and I want to thank you for sharing all those insights with us. And I would like to listen or hear some suggestions from you for making my content in my channel and also to improve my knowledge. So I would like to hear some suggestions.
Okay, well, I think it's really good stuff, and I really like the fact that you have short content. I mean, this is probably the exception. I hope you cut it down because I'm talking forever. But I really like the fact that you have these short tutorials, because I think 5-10 minute knowledge dumps are the best, because very often you're an artist and it's like you're just stuck on one particular thing. And you're like, there's someone, and you watch a video and you kind of, it's very nice to go, 5 minutes, how do you use, for example, I always use Mocha, but today Mocha's not using. I'm going to try the new planar tracker. Well, I don't even know how to use it because I've never used it in my life. How do I use it? And there's a 5-minute video. What you don't want to watch is a 1-hour tutorial of how to do prep and roto.
Got it.
With like that one bit of information you want at 47 minutes in. So I really like the fact that you create short content. I think it's the best format, to be honest. Improving it, I mean, all I'd say is just, I guess you're going to keep it up to date because things change. And as things change, you will change too, and you will learn new things. Improving your knowledge, I mean, just, I think just keep the love, like when you get bored of it and it starts to become tedious and you don't enjoy it anymore, you stop learning and, it's time to move on. You need to move up or move on, when you're excited to be a roto artist, it's your first job in VFX. That's great. When you're so bored that you'd rather tear out your own teeth than roto or something, then really, I'm going to leave VFX, or you're going to move into the next job. And when you do that, that's at some point you're going to be learning to lead, and you're going to be leading a team, and then you might start doing content about that, and that's something that there isn't enough of. So we'll see.
When we are stuck somewhere,
I'll be watching.
Yeah, when we are stuck somewhere, we definitely need to think, okay, time to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you get bored, right? And when you get bored that your quality of work starts to go down. Like when you get to a point where you're like, I have been doing the same thing for a long time, and I'm not getting better, and I'm starting to get worse. And the worst thing about that is like the people that are junior to you start to catch you up and overtake you because they've got they've got the hunger, the edge.
Passion.
So that's when you need to sometimes you need to leave the facility that you're working for, go and work somewhere else. Sometimes you need to speak to your boss and ask to be put on assigned to ask if they can give you a more senior role, and if they can't, you need to look for that somewhere else, or just a different kind of show. Especially sometimes you could be really good at one thing, that you're really good at doing snow or whatever, and then all you get is snow shots, and just like say, please don't give me any more snow shots. I want to do something totally different. Or I've always done CG characters. I want to do some
Awesome.
Stitching different shots together or something. Just whatever.
Yeah, awesome. So thank you once again for being with us in the podcast.
Thank you. And sorry about the sound on the camera.
No problem. That's it. So be safe and keep posting a lot of tutorials. I mean, a lot of things in your blog.
Oh, thank you. You too, Manish. I hope to see you about. I look forward to seeing this conversation, and hopefully it's useful to your audience. And see you on the post, I guess.
Yeah. Bye-bye.